Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 10th working group meeting for the TSP4 amendment process. We're going to quickly go through some introductions and stuff and go over the agenda, and then we'll jump into things. If I can actually get my PowerPoint to work here, we'll do that. So welcome, I'm Marcus Chatfield. I'm the Undersea Cable Coordinator for the Department of Land Conservation and Development. If we can kind of just go around really quickly and introduce ourselves. I'll just kind of start down my list here and let's have Andy start.
Good morning, everyone. Andy O'Neill, Marine Affairs Coordinator with DLCD.
Blake.
Good morning, Blake Helm, Proprietary Specialist with the Oregon Department of State Lands.
Thank you, Blake. Laurel.
Morning, everybody. Laurel Hellman, Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, Ocean Shore Resource Coordinator.
Thank you, Laurel. Natalia.
Good morning, Natalia Stranatka, Submerged Cable Analyst, Department of State Lands.
Thank you, Natalia. Scott McMullen.
Scott McMullen from Astoria, with the Oregon Fishermen's Cable Committee, representing fishing.
Thank you, Scott. Susan.
Hey, good morning. Susan Chambers, West Coast Seafood Processors Association and Commercial Fisheries Rep to OPAC.
Thank you, Susan. Delia.
Good morning, Delia Kelly, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Thank you, Delia. Jason Bush.
Good morning, Jason Bush with the Pacific Ocean Energy Trust and the Renewable Hydrogen Alliance.
Thank you, Jason. Tara.
Morning, Tara Brock with Oceana. I'm a vice chair on OPAC representing coastal conservation and chair of this great working group. Hopefully our last meeting here. Excited to be here. And I'm sorry I'm gonna stay off camera for just a moment while I finish a very belated breakfast.
Thank you, Tara. Becky Anthony.
Yeah, hi, Becky Anthony, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Thank you, Becky. Did I miss anyone? My things are jumping around over here. That's everyone that I see. All right. Well, we will get moving on. So we'll go over the agenda.
Marcus,
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to quickly flag for everyone today. I'm actually attending from Southern California. I'm attending a NOAA Science Advisory Board meeting, so I will have to make an apology that I'm going to be bouncing in and out of the meeting this morning and gone this afternoon. So I think you're in good hands with Marcus, and sorry for the inconvenience.
Thank you, Andy. So we're gonna just go quickly over the agenda. We're doing introductions now. We'll go over the agenda and then we'll review the timeline and kind of take a quick look at the fiscal impact statement that I sent out to everyone. Then we'll jump into discussing the decommissioning section, which was a section that was kind of worked on after the last working group meeting. And I think that we reached a good point there, but wanted to bring it before the whole group. We'll take a quick break. Then we will jump into tribal comments on the draft amendments. After that, we'll be working on the comments from NOAA. We will take lunch at 11:30, have a public comment at 12:30. And then we'll continue discussing the NOAA comments and then discuss comments from DOJ. All of this, as normal are general estimates and subject to change, and we could breeze through this really quickly, or it may be something that some portions may need longer discussion on. So especially today, this is subject to change based on how long we're talking about things. We'll talk about a couple of next steps at 3:45 or towards the end of the meeting if we end earlier, and we will adjourn at 4. So to kind of go over the dates of the upcoming meetings. So we're having this meeting today on the 26th. In September, the OPAC meeting is scheduled for September 8th. And the 25th of September is the last date that that OPAC has to make recommendations. So it's good that we're having that OPAC meeting a couple of weeks before that. should be a public hearing, a geographical hearing. That date is yet to be specifically determined, but should be in early October. To look at the, to have a public comment section on this these draft amendments, and then hopefully they will be adopted by LCDC at the LCDC meeting in November. So I have the fiscal impact statement here, but I hope that you all have it. I sent it in the email, so hopefully you'll be able to, you have been able to take a look at it. And I just wanted to take a moment to see if anyone had any thoughts on this, or if they felt like anything needed to change. This is part of the rulemaking process, so OPAC needs to see the fiscal impact statement, but the working group also needs to see it before we send it to OPAC. Let me see. It looks like some people have raised their hands, and it is not showing me who. Blake.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like the fiscal and economic impact doesn't really address the full cost to state agencies.
Okay.
I mean, it says rulemaking, but DSL is planning to hire additional staff for this and take legislative action, which requires a lot more expense than just proposed rulemaking. So I would like to see that included in there, just making note if you want to explicitly call out DSL having to, hire additional staff and other things, that's fine, as opposed to everyone. But I know that's what we're doing, and it's a direct result of, this working group and the amendments to the Territorial Sea Plan. So, excuse me.
Thank you very much for that input. I'm making a note of that now. Scott McMullen.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. I kind of took a little bit of issue with, I guess, number 2C. The department has not identified cost to small businesses is associated with this rule in regard to professional service, equipment, labor, etc. It clearly, and I'm not saying it's wrong that it's going to cost more. I'm saying it's wrong that this says that hasn't identified that there's any cost to small business associated with the rule. There's clearly more expense going to be needed in preparing an application. So,
but are those small businesses?
Well, they could be. I don't know. How do you define a small business?
That was
we have some of our cable companies going to Alaska, for example, are not real large entities.
All right, let me make a note of that.
And Andy, and if I could expound a little further, if you take a look at the rules would apply to pipelines, what about, Twin Rock Sanitary District? You wouldn't really consider that maybe it's not a business per se, but it's a small entity that certainly would have higher costs. I just thought it should be pointed out.
I'm making note of it right now. Andy and I did have some discussion back and forth on this, and kind of talked about what you're bringing up right now, and with the fact that those districts are not really small businesses, more that they are government. I don't know if Andy, did you have anything else to say on that?
Marcus, I think we need to go back to look very specifically at the definition of a small business.
Okay.
Because I think that, the point is a sanitary district, I think is a governmental entity, even though there may be additional costs associated with some of the actions. I was going to suggest in the first paragraph there that maybe we take DSL out of that list and have a specific sentence associated with their increased costs for responding to the plan amendment. And maybe Marcus, you and Blake could work together to ensure that that is appropriately added in here. I mean, this is exactly why we are asking for feedback from the working group, because we want to have this document ready to go for OPAC to, kind of provide comments to it ahead of the commission moving forward on rulemaking. So certainly
Absolutely.
appreciate the content and issues brought forward by the working group on this.
Absolutely. I made note on that and on Blake and Scott's point. Blake, is your hand raised again?
It is.
Okay.
I just wanted to concur with Scott. I was looking at that same thing and thinking that perhaps technically these cable companies aren't small businesses, but it would likely to be determined on what you would define as small business. Is it revenue? Is it number of employees? Whatever. So I think Scott's making a really good point, and especially as far as sewer districts and other smaller entities, I think perhaps we could put those could be, up in section 1 as identified any state agency units of local government. So we could identify special districts as something affected. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I made note of that. Laurel?
I was just going to make almost exactly the same point about local government. So it was already made. So I can put my hand down.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I really appreciate this feedback. Any other thoughts or comments on this? Scott?
Yeah, I would point out that in some cases, outfall pipes are not done by sanitary districts. They've been by businesses. I know at least one in Newport was by a private business. And I think it was the mill in Toledo, which Georgia Pacific probably is not a small business, but I don't know in the other cases up and down the coast. It seems like it's quite possible that there are small businesses that have chosen to have an ocean outfall. I can imagine that could take place somewhere.
All right, excellent.
Could be effective.
I just want to note for the record, since the chat isn't verbalized in the recordings, that Steve Shipsey provided a definition for small businesses, and that is to mean a corporation, partnership, sole proprietorship, or other legal entity formed for the purpose of making a profit, which is independently owned and operated from all other businesses and which has 50 or fewer employees. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much. Any other thoughts on this before we move on?
Just under that definition, I know that in some cases, cables are owned under they'll create a special, I don't know if it's an LLC, but a special corporation for the cables. And sometimes those cables don't have any employees. They have owners, but they don't have employees. So by the definition, they might fall as a small business by having less than 50 employees.
Thank you, Scott. I guess let's take a moment to circle back to introductions, because it seems like quite a few people have joined since we started. Unless there are other comments that we have on this fiscal impact statement, I've made notes of everything that people have talked about right now, and we will make those changes. I'm not seeing any hands raised, so let me go back down this list here. Jeff, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Burright. I'm the State Federal Relations Coordinator with the Oregon Coastal Management Program, responsible for federal consistency reviews and enforceable policies that we use to support those reviews.
Thank you, Jeff. Lene?
Hi, Lene Rutledge. I'm a resident of Tillamook County, so north coast area, representing the issues of coastal communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Lene. Steve?
Hi, folks. I'm Steve Shipsey. I'm counsel to the Oregon Coastal Management Program. And I'll just note that I have to leave at noon for the LCDC meeting, which is also today, but I'll be here this morning. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Reed?
Hi, everyone. Reed Burgett, Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries. I led the suitability study that we did. Thanks.
Thank you, Reed. I think that's everybody who joined, except for I think we have somebody on the phone that I don't have a name for. So maybe if whoever's on the phone could introduce themselves. Or we can just move on. All right. Oh, hello.
Hi, Marcus. Sorry. This is Elaine Aldrich with Davis Strait Tremaine calling in for the morning. I'll be able to join in this afternoon on Zoom. Member at large. Thanks.
Thank you very much. All right. So we'll move on from this. Let me just check the chat really quick. Okay, that's already been talked about. All right. So
And
we'll move
Tara
on.
has her hand raised.
Oh, I did not see that. Go ahead, Tara.
Thanks, Marcus. I was just going to suggest, given Steve's availability today, that we maybe readjust the agenda to move the DOJ comment discussion to this morning so that we have Steve's input and on that if needed.
Yeah, we can do that. Let me stop sharing for a moment and try and readjust a couple of things in this. Just to find where we are here. Just bear with me here, folks. So maybe we'll talk about that right off the bat, and we will jump into the decommission and recovery section after.
Does that work for everyone, and Steve in particular, given we're putting him on the spot first?
Yeah, fine by me.
Yep, works for me.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Just made sense to have Steve here when we're discussing any comments. Yes.
All right, almost got it sorted here, everybody. Just give me one more moment. Okay. So go back to sharing. All right, so we'll jump right into that then. So most of the comments from Steve were pretty minor edits with some, kind of Scrivener's changes. There were a couple things that I wanted to bring up to talk about with the group. One was section 3 in the policies changing. So in the top block of text here, we have what's written in the policy section, and below that in the middle we have the comment from Steve, and the bottom is what he's referencing. And so I just kind of wanted to bring this to everyone's attention and see about how everyone feels about changing this section in policies to match what's in 1.3b objective 1.3b. Any thoughts on this?
Marcus, maybe I'll explain why I suggested a change. In any time, I'm sorry, I'm sitting in the sun today, which is I'm not sorry about, but if it doesn't make for a great background. Anytime we have text language in one part and then different language in another part, any court that is asked to construe that will try to divine some intention behind the different language. So anytime we mean the same thing in two places, we should use the same parallel language in both places. That's the point of that comment.
Thank you, Steve. Any thoughts from any of the working group on this? I don't see any hands raised.
Marcus, I did see a couple of thumbs up
Okay.
in response, and I see Jeff Burright's hand up.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm good with what Steve has proposed. At the risk of a very slight scope creep, I'm wondering if it can be clarified what the first sentence of section 3 refers to. It says these policies and the implementation requirements of the following section are mandatory. And then the footnote says, notwithstanding part 1, paragraph F1B. So is that part 1 of Territorial Sea Plan Part 4?
Yeah.
Is that part 1 of section 4? So is this functionally saying that all of TSP Part 4 is in the sentence of these policies are mandatory? Because like section 1 and 2, of Territorial Sea Plan Part 4, I don't really see having enforceable policies. So I got a little lost with the pointing in a lot of different directions as the first sentence of our policies section.
Yeah, Jeff, let me help you with that. The policies are the policies listed in 3, and then the implementation requirements follow. The footnote 4 is a reference to part 1 of the Territorial Sea Plan overall, and it says these are the mandatory policies. So if you read part 1 and part 4 together without that footnote, you would not conclude that the policies in section 3 of part 4 and the implementation requirements that follow are mandatory policies. It's similar to a footnote we dropped in part 5 to provide the same clarification.
Okay. And this sentence is necessary in order to make section 3 and section 4 mandatory policies of part 4. If the sentence did not exist, they would not be mandatory.
If the sentence didn't exist, it would be uncertain what the mandatory policies of part 4 were. This is intended to specify those, and it also, I think, is intended to help clarify for purposes of federal consistency what the policies we're looking at to include as mandatory policies are.
Okay, thanks.
So Blake had a suggestion in the chat. Just want to capture that. Suggest changing the footnote to notwithstanding TSP Part 1, paragraph F1B. Steve, would there be a problem with that?
Probably not. I've never been a fan of notwithstanding because it always confuses me. The way the legislature tends to use it, it doesn't have the meaning I ever think it should. So that's probably why I strayed away from it, but we can take a look at that.
I mean, currently the footnote now uses notwithstanding.
Right. So kind of to get off of that track and just kind of get back to the changing of this sentence. There were some thumbs up. Let's just want to get the pulse of the group here, seeing how everyone feels about changing it to conform with objective 1.3b. So if you could just give me a thumbs up, or raise your hand if you want to object to that in some way. Go ahead, Laurel.
I'm not objecting. I'm just trying to clarify. Are we choosing to replace it with the language in B, or are we replacing the language that's in the first part with, swapping them? Like, which one are we using as the one we're choosing to conform?
Oh, it would be taking the language from 13B. So for routing and landing, installation, maintenance, decommission, and recycling, and replacing construct, operate, maintain, or decommission in the policy section. See, Delia?
I kind of prefer this one in 3. Is that an option? I kind of prefer the construct, operate, maintain, and decommission over the one with the recycling. Is that an option?
It could be an option, but then that would mean that we would need to change potentially objective 13B.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Blake?
There may have been a reason why we chose to use different language, and I believe we had a discussion that the policies and requirements of the Territorial Sea Plan are only relevant to the activities that occur in the Territorial Sea. And so we have, an objective that speaks to the landing, which, I've just, if I remember correctly, I believe that was something that we discussed, that, can the Territorial Sea apply to requirements for things that don't occur in the Territorial Sea? So.
Well, so I guess we have two different things kind of on our plate now, and that is, do we keep it as is? And I guess I'd like to ask Steve if there's going to be a problem with us keeping it as is, or do we change both sections to reflect what's in the policy section, or do we change, I guess it's 3 things, or do we change both sections to conform to the objective? Steve, do you have thoughts on if we wanted to keep it as is in the policy section?
Frankly, I don't know how you'd have an objective that then wasn't implemented by policy, but it's kind of up to you. If there's a hierarchy, perhaps the objective is broader than the policy, that then it seems like you're lacking a policy on the routing and landing and recycling of infrastructure piece of it.
Natalia?
Dale, can you explain why do you want to change it? Because I think in the past we spent quite enough time to discuss each objective before moving on for different section and subsection. What is this problem here? Can you elaborate this? Thanks.
Was that directed at me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because we discussed this already and spent so much time for each objectives before moving to policies.
Yeah.
So I don't see the problem to, make the same paragraph to be
Sure. I was just saying that if the recommendation from Steve is that we pick one and use it universally, I would prefer the construct, operate, maintain, and decommission, because I think it provides better coverage for all the different seafloor infrastructure types that we might contemplate under Part 4. The language in Objective B does include routing and landing, which I like and would be okay with if we weren't being advised to pick one and make it consistent. So that was just my thought about that. If we're picking one, I would pick policy 3 over objective B, but, and then use it in both places. That's what I was recommending. But I don't feel strongly about that. So if others feel strongly about their perspectives, that's just fine.
Yeah, Adelia, I mean, I would be happy with that change just because then, you know, instead of having a broader objective to our policy, we would have the same objective as our policy. So I think that's instead of possibly putting something in our policies that the territorial sea plan may not have authority over, just because that was a question that we had on whether or not we could implement policies and requirements for things outside the activities outside the territorial sea. So
All right, so I guess the question now is there objection to changing the objective 1.3b to conform to the language in the policy section? And then I guess we would be replacing routing and landing, installation, maintenance, decommission, and recycling to construct, I guess it'd be constructing, operating, maintaining, or decommissioning. Let's see, I see a chat. Jeff had a question in the chat that says, do state agencies approve permits, licenses, leases, or other authorizations related to recycling? And that is a question for
anyone, really.
Yeah.
It's a question that if we're saying that decisions of state agencies with respect to these things must follow the territorial sea plan, by omitting recycling, are we saying that, it seems like we are saying that Territorial Sea Plan Part 4 would not apply to any actions to recycle something that was used on the seafloor.
well, why wouldn't that be a part of, sorry to jump in, Jeff, why wouldn't that be a part of decommissioning? Why wouldn't recycling be a part of decommissioning?
I don't know. It would not be clear to me that they are the same, but I guess I could see if you have some sort of logical argument there that you would not do recycling not related to decommissioning. Like, what if you are replacing something that's out there that was old with something that is new?
Yeah, no, fair point. I mean, I'm happy to include recycling in that list because I think the recycling occurs within the territorial sea.
So then the change would be to add recycling after decommission.
This is Elaine. Can I hop in here for a second? I just think that the recycling is a component of decommissioning, but it also could be a component of maintenance. In the sense of if you're going in to maintain something, take something out, maybe you're recycling what you take out, same thing with decommissioning. So it seems like it adds a new element to it. And again, it then raises the question of inconsistent language between policy and its objective.
Thank you, Elaine. Natalia, then Delia. You're muted, Natalia.
Yes. So first point regarding recycling, I think we already discussed, we had decommission and recycling in the beginning, and then we decided to use recovery instead of recycling. Because decommissioning definition could be, okay, we stop, it's out of operation, but it doesn't mean that you remove cables, let's say, from the seabed and you do something with that. So that's why I think we already discussed, and we call this decommissioning and recovery. And it was on the outline. Yeah, recycling, if company decide to use any metal and any materials in the decommissioning cable, like copper or something else for recycling stuff and sell that. So it's different. We can add decommissioning and recovery, and recycling could be a part of recovery. So that's what we discussed in the past, my understanding. So this is the first point. And the second one regarding if we can change the policy under number 3, add it as an objective. So I'm okay with that, but only if we can add routing and landing before construct, because construct is already like installation, but routing and landing, when DSL will define which route to use for new cable. So it also should be there. So we can use policy under number 3, saying that the lease or other authorization to route, land, and construct, operate, maintain, and decommission and recovery any cables, pipelines, etc. So that's my 2 suggestions. Thanks.
Thank you. Delia?
I think this is just an issue of lumping versus splitting, right? How do we define construction? How do we define decommissioning? I don't think we need to get into the weeds with these specific terms if we just use the ones that we actually have authorizations associated with. So I don't know that we have anything specific for recycling, but I know that ODFW always advocates for recycling, and we definitely do that in like FERC licenses, for example. I don't know if we have anything in the state though that specifically calls for that. If we do, great, let's use it. So my suggestion would be that we add routing. I agree with Natalia that that is part of our authorization process. I think it's a little iffy about the landing because that's onshore outside of the territorial sea, and routing sort of covers that. So I would suggest routing, constructing, operating, maintaining, decommissioning, or use the or, not the and, recycling. I think that covers everything, would be my suggestion. Are there any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it's a good suggestion because I think you're right.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Are we talking about the policy or the objective? Sorry, or are we talking about both?
Yeah, thanks. It would be both. We're talking about what can we put in both places so that we have consistent language appropriate for the objective and the policy. And again, since you're on the phone, I'll just repeat what I said. I'm suggesting that we change it to routing, constructing, operating, maintaining, decommissioning, or recycling.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look at it and offer my opinion later this afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just chime in and say I like Delia's suggestion,
Thank you, Scott.
and particularly the or at the end. Decommissioning or recycling. I don't think we have a requirement to recycle. I think it's commonly very commonly done, but I think it's a policy decision that has to be discussed if it's going to become a requirement.
Thank you, Scott. Jeff and then Blake.
Yeah, gosh, I'm so sorry for the can of worms I'm about to open, but if you look at the actual policy of Section 3, this is just the preamble to that policy saying state agencies have to follow these policies when they do these actions. But then we look at the actual policy and it says design and site projects such that proposed development actions will maintain and protect to the maximum extent practicable. So we include in this list like maintenance, operation, recycling as actions. But then when we get to the actual policy, we say you must only design and site projects such that the actions will comply with maintaining and protecting. So there's kind of a mishmash here of our projects required to operate and maintain projects such that they will protect and maintain natural resources? Or are they only required to design and site projects such that the actions you take after would maintain and protect natural resources? And if I'm not making any sense, you guys can ignore me and move on, but I'm thinking of how to strictly apply this.
Thank you, Jeff. Blake and then Delia.
Well, two things. I did like Delia's language, and I'm not trying to be persnickety, but I think we need an and as well as an or. So and decommissioning or recycling, because you know, it's not as if the policy applies to you know, routing or construction or operation. It applies to all of those, but it's decommissioning or recycling. I don't know if I'm being overly persnickety, but moving on to Jeff's point, the operation would and maintenance would still be required to follow, you know, what's laid out in the easement terms and conditions, which requires that they, you know, maintain the easement area, that they, you know, conduct themselves in a manner that is not, you know, damaging to the resource, or, you know, there's a whole slew of, you know, terms and conditions, you know, so I don't know if that gets to your point, but I know that, you know, our easement specifically, you know, speaks to the construction, the operation and maintenance and the decommissioning of these cables, and is considered, you know, to be, you know, applicable for the whole life of the project, you know, soup to nuts.
Thank you, Blake. Delia.
I'm reading this suggestion from Steve as specific to these two sentences, not related to everywhere else that we talk about these activities throughout the policy. And these two sentences are talking about applicability of Part 4. So these policies are mandatory. State agencies are going to issue these authorizations for these activities. So it's just laying out the activities that we have authorizations for. So I think we need to keep this simple and clear. And anytime that we add a new term in here, then it begs the question whether or not we have to define it. So I'm a little nervous about this conversation because it's getting a little slippery. So can I just suggest that we try to keep this simple and just list the activities that we have authorizations for? Because that's what we're saying in both of these instances, I believe. So that's my suggestion.
So if I'm hearing things correctly, what's on the table right now is to change the policy section and objective 1.3b to conform to each other and read something like routing, constructing, operating, maintaining, and decommissioning, and then either saying or recycling or include including recycling.
I prefer Steve's language, honestly, to mine as opposed to mine. So that's what I would say.
So then it would be routing, constructing, operating, maintaining, and decommissioning, including recycling. So I see 2 thumbs up in the chat on that. Anyone else? I see Delia's got her thumb up. Oh, there's a bunch of them. Is there anybody who objects to this language? All right. I'm not seeing any hands raised, so let's move to the next section. And I've made a note of that to make that change to make both sections conform. Okay. Moving on to the next one. is this under routing and landing. There was language changes. I just wanted to bring those up since DSL had a major part in writing this section. So the changes were changing, I think, rights away to easements. And so I just wanted to run this by the group and kind of get DSL's weigh in on things. And if Steve wants to talk about why this change was made, now's a great time.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity, Marcus. I went through and I was trying to think of what a right of way was out in the territorial sea, and I couldn't immediately think of something that DSL did that was termed a right of way. So I wanted to check and make sure. And I think that the administrative rule uses the term easements. And so I checked with my counterpart who works with DSL, Matt DeVore, and he confirmed that he preferred the use of easements because right of way was an uncertain term to him as well.
Yeah, I'm not really certain how that slipped in there. So I would agree with the change. So there you go.
Delia?
Yeah, hopefully a quick question. Is that true for all the infrastructure types that we might be authorizing under Part 4 or applying Part 4 to? I think 14183 is cables, but is that true? Is that language true for all the authorization types? Steve, do you know? Okay, Blake.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Yeah, we don't have anything that we issue that's called a right of way.
Okay.
We have entered into rights of entry, but that is typically with the federal government. And it's because they, require the use of their form, which calls it a right of entry. So if it's our form and it's us issuing something under our rules, it would never be called a right of way. So completely agree with this change. But Steve, I did have a question because I looked back in our Division 142, which are the marine research area, and it doesn't explicitly state that authorizations cannot be issued in these areas, but rather that they should be conditioned in certain ways. So I just wanted to know if this would require additional rulemaking on the part of, good grief, ourself, ODFW. I think it's us. We enter those rules, but so just curious.
That's a good question, Blake. I think it would because there's a statute that requires that agencies' rules conform to the Territorial Sea Plan. I can pull that statute up, but it's there in 196. I don't have a site for you at the top of my head, but I do think that might be.
I was just looking at it. So yeah, at 196. So
Laurel?
I question whether I should bring this up, but so this is just about DSL granting easements, but we have the language about fixtures in other sections related to cables, I'm assuming, but other types that we have discussed, other types of fixtures, scientific equipment, etc. And there have been requests in the past for temporary installations of what you might construe as a fixture within these protected areas for scientific monitoring equipment and that kind of thing. So I just wanted to make sure we're not excluding that possibility for uses that are beneficial to the protected areas for marine research areas. Research reserves, marine reserves allow for that type of thing if they're benefiting acquisition of knowledge, for example, OA sensors and that kind of thing. I just making sure we're not excluding that possibility with this language. I don't think we are, but because it's about easements and there's other mechanisms, but I thought I'd put it out there.
no, Laurel, I think you are correct about that. if we're talking about other types of infrastructure like scientific research, those would be under separate rules or through a combination of authorizations. So we may see an easement as well as a special use lease for, whatever that fixture is, or if it's related to ocean renewable energy, be under a different division and would be not an easement either for some of those fixtures, but for the cables attached to them, those would be easements. So I think that's a really good point to make it more broad. We could just say new proprietary authorizations, because that's a term that we use within the department, a waterway use authorization, but that is also pretty specific and very inside baseball. So I think maybe new authorizations might be a better term. So.
Yeah, Laurel.
But the intent is to include things associated with cables, right? We're not trying to exclude the ability for somebody to get an authorization, whatever type of authorization, to do research in these areas that are designated for that purpose in some cases. So I just wanted to flag that. So hopefully we're not doing that.
I think you should be comforted by the words shall not grant easements through marine reserves, which to me indicates that these are things that are purely passing through as a matter of routing or convenience, rather than things that are there for a small footprint within such an area for purposes of research.
Yeah, sorry if I misunderstood your question there, Laurel.
I guess that brings up at the end of this sentence, it says, and shall not grant easements on rocky habitat areas within the state territorial sea. So is there some language that we should add to have exceptions for scientific research, Steve?
Perhaps you could just change on to through. So it shall not grant easements through rocky habitat areas.
Okay. Delia?
I think a lot of that is addressed, Laurel, by the definition of fixtures, which is only the permanent fixtures. So it'd just be the larger, like OOI type research projects, right? It wouldn't be a Met buoy or, any of our research activities that are conducted in those sensitive areas. And I think that the permanent fixtures, we have so many other ways to make sure that they don't occur in those areas. I think that sentence is really important to have, that we're not going to be, the DSL will not be authorizing activities in those areas. And so, yeah, I just wanted to make that point that, most of the installations that I can think of off the top of my head are temporary and wouldn't fit in our definition of fixtures anyway. So we wouldn't be applying Part 4 to them.
I guess for clarification, Blake, are those temporary fixtures? Do they require an easement?
Not if they're temporary.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, by nature, an easement is long-term intent use of that property, and it's a 20-year term. So yeah, anything less than that, and then with the intent to remove, not be there permanent, would require a different form of authorization.
So we could leave the language as is without changing on to through.
I don't know. I'm just thinking, perhaps there's, because this is just a really interesting thought experiment here. So, not having anything specific in front, it's just hard to play hypothetical. How would the department authorize, I can imagine some sort of research installation that perhaps technically goes through a research area, and is maybe doing research within and outside adjacent and requires to go through, and that would that preclude that? So, it's hard to say. So I'm kind of at a loss on whether through or on would be the best, what is this, an article that we're talking about? So, good grief, I'm really bad at my 7th grade grammar, so.
Thank you, Blake. Delia?
I just wanted to make a suggestion. The parts that are saying through are, think of a polygon, they're an area, they're a square, they're a box. And then the rocky habitat areas can be like discrete areas of rock. And I think what we're trying to protect is the rock itself. And so I prefer on myself because it's really ambiguous when you're saying through rocky habitat areas. Are you talking about between two large and spatially far apart reefs? That's through. So I think that since we're talking about different rocky areas, I think we should keep it as on because we're trying to keep it off the rock. That's my thought.
Any other thoughts on this section? Blake?
I do, and I'm kind of remiss to say anything, but where there's a section that says and shall determine when the state territorial sea has reached carrying capacity. Can we perhaps and may as a result determine when the state, so the sentence there begins with DSL shall consider the benefit of implementing corridors. And what I would, I'm afraid that this shall determine at the end is a requirement for DSL that we may not want to take if we don't end up, implementing corridors for infrastructure crossing. So, yeah, just that is just something that, kind of popped in my head when looking at that. So didn't know how best to address that, but I think perhaps making it a may instead of a shall might be a better change.
So it is and may determine is what your suggestion is?
Yeah, because it looks and it appears like this, how we're trying to construct this is that, we would consider implementing corridors. And because of that, consideration, we may end up determining, hey, there's a carrying capacity here for new easements because there's no room to put them, right? And so what I wouldn't want to do is to, if we didn't implement corridors, are we still then required to, state when there's a carrying capacity for, easements in the territorial sea? So that is just my thought. And I saw a thumbs up for Steve, so I feel like that's a confirmation. I don't know. It's always good to have a
Complete
lawyer.
validation, Blake.
Yeah, it's
Complete
great
validation.
to have a lawyer on your side.
It's an attaboy. You got an attaboy. Yeah, no, that makes sense. The structure would be that they make this consideration, and that consideration may lead to a conclusion. So that makes sense to me.
Thank you, Blake. Thank you, Steve. Scott?
Yeah, I guess I would even go so far as say DSL may consider the benefit because it's as we heard, I think from Ryan and I heard at the very beginning of my discussion with cable owners 25 years ago, they absolutely do not like to have cables funneled into corridors. That's they are absolutely opposed to that because they need room for maintenance, and and in addition to just room for maintenance, even though you could make a wide corridor wide enough for maintenance at I think 3 times the water depth. The other issue is a single event in an area can wipe out multiple cables, and so if the state considers and decides they want to require corridors, that's sort of the end of new cables coming in. And from what I've heard from the cable industry is they just absolutely don't want to be pushed into corridors. we had, as fishermen, we had suggested that from the beginning. That was sort of our opening argument. If you're going to have cables, put them all in the same area. And if we have to jump over them with our fishing gear, they'd at least be all in one area. But they said, absolutely, we are not going to put cables together. We need diversity and spread them out as quickly as we can.
Thank you, Scott. Blake?
Yeah, just wanted to, agree with, those sentiments, Scott, that you're saying. There's some, real, consequences to implementing corridors. And so what I would say is when we talked about this, the shell is just for the consideration and is not a part of, the implementation. So the requirement here is for us to consider this and not for us to implement any singular policy. And, I think it's good for us to consider it and look and, look at the benefits of, different planning options. That said, I don't really have any heartburn about having this as a may. So I guess that's a long story short, or short story long.
Thank you, Blake. Tara?
I think we've already discussed this ad nauseum in previous meetings, so I'm struggling that we are now revisiting issues that were settled and things that have gone before OPAC and been presented. So I'm struggling a bit here with going backwards on things that we've already, this was really to just review DOJ's comments, not previous language that has been put in front of the working group for several meetings at this point. So I just wanted to set that that baseline of where we're at.
Thank you, Tara. Blake?
Yeah, sorry to take up so much time. Tara, my intent is not to change substantively, what we've already taken to OPEC. And so, yeah, I'm just trying to make sure that what we have is enforceable policy and clear direction on what the agencies have to do.
Thank you, Blake. Lene?
I just want to reinforce what Tara just said. We went over this in earlier discussions, and I think we are going far beyond where our discussion was and what we thought was an agreement. I'm not interested in hearing anything more on this topic. I am interested in moving on. I want us to live up to the commitments that we made earlier in this process and not start to revisit language and try to change the context. What we were trying to do in this discussion was only respond to DOJ comments. Thank you.
Yes, yes, Delia, I can do that. I was actually going to do that right now. So the one change that that Blake brought up that Steve gave him an attaboy for, I think we should vote on, as well as voting on keeping the language as Steve has presented it to us. So are there any problems with changing the shall determine to may determine, and then keeping everything else as Steve has suggested here? Tara?
Yes, I have a problem with changing the shall to may at this point. We have already discussed this and gone through this.
You're saying the second shall?
Both shalls, yeah.
Okay.
Both. This was a long discussion. We've already been over this. I'm again struggling here. This was a discussion at OPAC specifically. So yeah, I would want to bring this back to OPAC and make that an OPAC decision, and not have the working group change that without being clear to OPAC.
Okay, so I will make a note of bringing it to OPAC, but hang on, Lene and then Blake.
I just wanted to reinforce what Tara said. I'm not in support of making this change. If we go to a vote, I will vote against it. My recommendation is it goes back to OPAC. Thank you.
Thank you. Blake?
Happy to retract this correction, and we can just vote on the change to easements and move on.
All right, great. Any opposition to changing rights of way to easements? Linnea, is that a new hand or legacy? Okay. I'm seeing thumbs up. So we will move on. And so mainly, I don't know if Steve has anything else that he particularly wants to bring forth, but these were the two major points. I think that most of the other changes were kind of scriveners edits and changing some structure of sentences so I don't know if there was anything else that you wanted to bring up to the group.
No, I'm happy that we've covered these and look forward to moving on to the other stuff.
Was there anything that anyone else had in reviewing the DOJ comments that they wanted to bring up at this time? Okay, I don't see any hands. Oh, I do. Hi, Blake.
Sorry, Steve made a comment on the definition of mitigate, and it's similar but not the same as another portion, I believe, of Territorial Sea. So I didn't know if that was something we should address or not. I believe the definition came from Delia, so I don't know if she wants to talk about that or not. And I'm not trying to hold anything up, but I didn't know if that was something that we needed to discuss or not.
You're talking about the section where in the policy section, we have the maintain and protect language, and that's very, very almost verbatim the mitigate language, correct?
Yeah, Steve has a comment in the definition section and says this is nearly verbatim to the maintain and protect under policy 3. So it should be identical, or is there intention for a difference? And I didn't know if that was something that Delia could talk about, because I don't recollect a good reason for there being a difference. So
me neither. So yeah, there's the several places that mitigation is sort of defined throughout the document does stem from our habitat mitigation policy. But it is a little bit different. I cannot explain to you why it's a little bit different. And I agree that it should be the same. We also have some comments from NOAA related to that. And so I think we're going to need to have maybe like a bigger, broader conversation about how that structure is used, that 5-step structure is used throughout the document in the definition of mitigation. And then also, I don't have it handy, but a couple of other sections. And, ideally I would much prefer that just be consistent throughout.
Just a little bit of background on that. We had very lengthy discussions during the working group, during multiple working group meetings, as to why that section is different than the mitigation definition, and that kind of comes back to us just saying, see the definition of mitigate, versus there were some very strong feelings that we need to have that in there and have it be slightly different, because otherwise we could just say see mitigate. I mean, I will be bringing it up again when we talk about NOAA comments, but I did want to kind of bring up that we did have a lot of discussions about why it is the way that it is in the document.
But can you remind everybody why? I'm sorry, was that, did I feel strongly about that at some point? I don't know.
I think there were a lot of very strong feelings.
Okay.
And I don't know exactly the particular individuals who had strong feelings about it. But I do know that section. Let me see if I can just bring up the document here. Let's see. I have to get out of all these PowerPoints and things. Hang on one second, sorry.
So I do remember having a discussion. So the way that our habitat mitigation policy is written, it includes a couple of alternatives in the mitigation hierarchy that are not an option in the ocean. And we talked about that quite a bit. Restoring and replacing. How are you going to do that in the ocean? So, so it was changed to, you know, the final of the fifth of the 5 steps is compensation rather than mitigate by several means. So I do remember that part of the conversation.
So this is the section that we're talking about. And let me see if I can go look at the definition for mitigate, and we can see where the differences lie.
Marcus, for what it's worth, I'm trying to do the same thing. And I think the only thing I can find is that in number 2, there's a reference to timing in the maintain or protect, but otherwise they're looking the same.
And I think at the very last point, there's monetary compensation listed under maintain and protect, whereas compensating for the impact by replacing or providing comparable substitute. And that was those were the 2 sticking points, was adding time. And this did come from ODFW, adding timing to the limiting the degree or magnitude, that section. And then there was a point made by ODFW that it's very difficult to replace by providing a comparable substitute in the ocean. So having monetary compensation was very important. I remember the conversation now. So that's where it came from, Delia.
Of course it did. So then can I just suggest that we use the language that we worked on in section 3 as our definition? And then they're consistent? Does that address your point, Steve?
Yeah, or you could just have the definition be the definition of what maintain and protect means.
How would that work? Oh,
I mean, we're using maintain and protect
yeah.
in the policy, but then we're defining it as mitigate.
So would we just say under mitigate, see policy section, maintain and protect?
You could do that, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the point is, if they're intended to be the exact same thing, they should be parallel.
So I think what we could do, I'm not sure why it needs to be in section 3 if it's in the definitions. So we could just take the language from section 3, make that the definition of maintain and protect, and then refer to the definition in section 3. So it's only in one place.
So how would that, so that would just read, for purposes of this section, or Sorry. I think that so this is getting back into a conversation we've had many times. And one of the problems was there were people who felt very strongly that we keep the maintain and protect language in here. And so then we needed to say, for the purposes of the section, maintain and protect requires this. And so I just feel like we're rehashing the same arguments that we've had over and over and over again. Blake?
I was kind of going to get to the same point, Marcus, and I was the one who brought it up, but I think what we did is this maintain and protect is here because, mitigate and mitigation have very specific meanings for different agencies. ODF&W has their own definition of mitigation, which is honestly slightly different than DSL's definition of mitigation. And so when we talk about mitigation, when talking about wetland determinations or removal fill rather permits, it's very specific, to our definitions and not to what ODF&W defines as. So the roundabout saying, like, perhaps referring to Steve's comment, is they should be separate definitions. Mitigate should be defined differently as to maintain and protect. I don't know.
And just want to address a point that Reed brought up in the chat, and that is that NOAA has comments on excluding compensatory mitigation, and we'll talk about that a little bit more during the NOAA comments. So we will be revisiting the definitions here. Could we reword maintain and protect requires mitigation in order of priority? Thoughts? Delia?
I really hear you that it's beyond the 12th hour now, beyond the 11th hour. So I'm all on board with not doing a rehash, but I want to find a solution for what both DOJ and NOAA have brought up problems with this. I think we're going to have to deal with NOAA's problem with compensatory mitigation differently. But for Steve's comment, I think we just need to have consistency in the two places it's discussed. So I think I heard Blake remind everyone that we have different definitions of mitigation. And I heard Marcus suggest that we just changed that to a definition of maintain and protect. So does anyone have problems with section 3, 1 through 5 as it's drafted? Because that was the language that ODFW had suggested. And so I think that's the definition, to me, that's the definition of maintain and protect. And it means the same thing as what we're calling mitigation. So couldn't we just use that language? Do we need the definition of mitigation in the definition section in the glossary?
There are places in the document where we use the term mitigation, so.
So we need the definition to be mitigate.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Did everyone see the suggestion from Reed in the chat that we could reword to maintain and protect requires mitigation in order of priority? So it's sort of a way to just make these the same, given that we've defined mitigation that way. I'm not sure.
Yeah, can I just add on to that, because that's in line with what I was suggesting, but then we lose the parts of section 3 that ODFW wanted added. So I think we could do that, but then we'd want to take the number 1 through 5 in section 3 and make that the definition.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I would be comfortable with that. If that, then that fixes the problem of similar but not same.
Hi, this is Elaine. Sorry, I'm catching up. Are you saying we define, maintain, and protect requires and as like defining, maintain, and protect using 1 through 5, and then in this policy 3 only using the phrase maintain and protect? Is that what we're talking about?
What I was suggesting, and I think is aligned with what Reed was saying, is that section 3 would read maintain and protect by mitigating in order of priority, period. We'd remove the 1 through 5 and we'd move that to the definition of mitigation.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Is everyone comfortable with that change? Any objection to that change? So the change right now as it stands would be to change the definition of mitigate to include this 1 through 5, which is really just including either monetary compensation in the 5th one and adding timing to the 2nd one. Those are the only 2 changes that would be made to the definition itself, and then changing this section to read, for purposes of the section, maintain and protect requires mitigation, comma, in order of priority, period. And then deleting 1 through 5.
Yeah, I guess I was suggesting leaving the 1 through 5 in this section as well. It would produce some repetition in the document, but I don't know how much people are going to refer to the definitions anyway, unless they really care about the specific wording. So I guess I would vote for keeping it as is and just making the 2 definitions of mitigation in the document the same.
So Elaine suggested in the chat we may want to table this until we talk about the larger mitigation comments from NOAA, which I see your point, but I think that that's going to have to be dealt with slightly differently than this. And we have some kind of suggestions there, but we can table this discussion. I have made notes about it, so we can move on. Let me look at what my schedule that is absolutely, we're off schedule in some way, I'm sure, what it looks like. Let's take a break. Let's do that because we have skipped 2 breaks almost at this point. So let's come back.
Delia has her hand up, maybe just before we break, if there's one last thing here.
All right, Delia?
Real quick, I'm okay with tabling this, but while Steve's on, I just want to confirm that your comment just has to do with being consistent, right? So as long as we find a solution where we're consistent.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delia. Thank you, Steve. Let's come back at 10:40. Hi, everyone. When you get back, please let me know in the chat or by turning your camera on or give me a thumbs up reaction. We'll start in just a moment. All right, folks, welcome back from your break. I hope you had a chance to stretch your legs. We are going to move on. We're kind of tabling the discussion about mitigation until a later time when we talk more about the NOAA comments, but I wanted to talk about the decommission and recovery section that a small group of us worked on after the last working group meeting in order to try and reach some consensus there. And I'd like to bring that up to everyone, and then we'll move into talking about tribal comments if we have time before lunch. Otherwise, we'll get to that after lunch. So here's the decommission and recovery section as was changed. You can take a moment to look it over. It was also in the documents that I sent out. It's changed from having the whole section about decommission and recovery for cables separate from other infrastructure, and this was a way to kind of tie things in. And since it is a section that relates to actions that take place after federal consistency review, we decided that having just reference to the other laws that govern this is all right. I don't know if Jeff has a different opinion on that, but since this isn't really covered in federal consistency, we thought that would be okay. So any thoughts here?
Sorry, you thought that what would be okay, Marcus?
Sorry, since this isn't really covered by federal consistency because it's something that happens after, you had mentioned before that having laws referenced was an issue for federal consistency, but it's not an issue in the document itself, especially since this section doesn't have federal consistency kind of governing it.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure I follow, but point being, I don't think we intend to include this one as an enforceable policy, so it can be however this group wants it to look.
So this was something that we worked on with DSL and go ahead, Scott.
Well, just a question maybe for Jeff or Blake, but how long is an encroachment easement for? What's the period?
We have issued, I believe, one for 30 years, and the one for edge cable, excuse me, was for 50 years. So.
Thank you.
Delia?
Yeah, so I'm in support of this language. I helped draft this language with Blake and Tara and Marcus. One thing that I wanted to highlight at the very first sentence, the usable life or operational / design life is pretty clunky. And so it's my opinion that it doesn't need to have usable, operational, and design. But I think at least Andy felt that all three of those were appropriate to have in here. So I would just suggest then that it say usable, comma, operational, comma, or design life instead of usable life or operational /. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on that? So I guess what's on the table right now is accepting this language change from a couple of drafts ago, and then changing, and then I guess a separate thing to talk about is what Delia just brought up, changing it to after the usable, comma, operational, comma, or design life, as opposed to how it's written here. See some thumbs up. Any dissent from either of those or one of those? All right, I am not seeing anything, just seeing thumbs up. So we will move on to the next. So the next,
Marcus, so what's happening there?
so
are we using Delia's new language, which I support?
yes. So
Okay.
the change would be, actually, let me take a note on this too. Change would be, just in that first sentence, what Delia suggested, having it say after the usable, comma, operational, comma, or design life. Okay, so we will move on to the next. The next is an addition of appendices. Now we do have an appendix already labeled Appendix B, but this is Scott provided me some chartlets, which were great, and I sent them off to Andy, and Andy is producing a graphic that is, I don't know if this is the final graphic, but it would be something similar to this that shows the whole Oregon coast. And it would just show the locations of cables, and it would have inactive, operational, or research cables in the legend. So I guess that is one change, and then another change would be the addition of an Appendix C, which would have the enforceable policies listed, and we'll discuss that a little bit more in the NOAA comment section. But I guess right now I just wanted to see, kind of read the pulse of the group as to adding a map similar to the one right here, just showing inactive, operational, and research cables. Jason?
Yeah, just obviously this seems reasonable. Although I have to say I don't know if it's just my computer, but I couldn't tell you the difference between inactive and operational based upon the graphics.
Yeah, I see that, and I agree. I think that the way that I had to zoom out in order to get this screenshot kind of made us lose a lot here. But it looks a little bit different whenever it's zoomed in, and the size it would be within the actual document itself. And like I said, I don't know that this is the final version of the graphic anyway. Andy's working on that, and I think that Andy had to step away, so we can't really talk to it right now. But thank you for that note. Blake?
I was going to make the same comment, but suggest that perhaps there's a way to provide some index maps that could zoom in on, clusters and clumps, right? Because there are some pretty discrete areas that we could zoom in on the shore that would show, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, it looks pretty, 5 discrete areas that you could have an index map for, that kind of show which ones are inactive and active better. So that's my, limited GIS cartography knowledge.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that a lot. I made a note about that. Reed?
Yeah, just one question or comment. I was curious if this has all of the cables. There are some differences in the compilations I've seen, with a couple cables that aren't OFCC sort of governed, and so it might be worth just double checking against the NOAA compilation to make sure that it's complete.
So double check with NOAA.
Yeah, off the top of my head,
layer on the marine cadastre, I thought had another cable or two by Bandon, but
I was going to add, off the top of my head, I believe there is a DoD cable in the North Coast that kind of curls, and I'm not seeing that up there. So I think Reed's right. There's some discrepancies in whether this is a complete list or not.
yeah, that may be by design too, Blake, but
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I would just point out, when I made the chartlets, I included cables that weren't OFCC cables because I knew that for this purpose, it would need to be all cables. A suggestion would be to change inactive cables to out of service cables. That's a sort of a standard industry term, an out of service cable. And the other point that I want to make is that sometimes cables that are no longer used commercially are turned over for science work, and that's sort of a new, especially important thing now, as they're using technology called distributed area sensing, where the fiber cable itself becomes a sensor, and they've found ways to do that both on active and inactive cables. So it probably is good to keep in mind that in the future we may have scientific uses for cables even after their commercial uses are over.
Thank you, Scott. And as to your point, Laurel, I don't think Andy is here right now either. I think he had to step out, but I'm making notes of the different suggestions. I guess the vote here is to just include, do we include a map that is similar to this after we go and do the double checking? Is everyone okay with including a map like this and maybe including the index maps that Blake suggested, as long as we kind of incorporate these changes that we're talking about here? Go ahead, Scott.
Well, I can just tell you that the NOAA data is not as good as our data, but because they don't know all of they don't have recorded the cables that have been pulled out of the water. A lot of times they still show them even though they've been recovered, and they don't have always up-to-date maps of new cable installations. So, go ahead and check, but we have more current information than they do.
I'll make note of that as well. Go ahead, Delia.
I just wanted to ask about the legend title versus the map title, where it says undersea cable routes as of July 2023, but then the legend says telecommunication undersea cables 2023. So if this is depicting telecommunication cables that exist, then I don't think it should say undersea cable routes.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would
note that.
Yeah, I would suggest making the title of, and I'm not sure on, whether this captures everything like Blake and everybody else was talking about. So, but if we're just putting in a map of telecommunication cables that exist or did exist, then that should be the title of the map.
All right, I have made a note on that, and also note on what Scott had brought up about the NOAA versus OFCC cables charts. Go ahead, Scott.
Just going to point out that the science cables aren't shown on that chart. Delia is correct. It really should be cables, not telecom cables only.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
No, now I'm confused.
Yeah, to clarify, I think, Scott, you're saying that ideally we would add the research cables.
Yeah,
and then
correct.
we could, yeah.
That's what I got.
As it stands right now,
the chart should show all cables, not just telecom cables.
Yeah.
I agree, and I made note of that.
Okay, thanks.
Any other thoughts on that? Are we? Is everyone okay with adding, after changing the map to conform to this discussion that we just had, to adding a map to it? Add the PacWave cable. Yeah, I got a note on that as well. Okay, perfect. So we will move to the next slide. So I wanted to talk about the tribal comments that I got. I did have a tribal briefing where there were some discussions that happened. The main changes that tribal representatives wanted to see were that we expand some of the background section. So there were 3 main points that were included in the amendment process. There were also some other points that talked about adding some GIS data to if we do a web, to the landing page and to a map viewer. But I'm going to just talk about what we talked about for the amendments. Mainly, it was in the background section, including a mention of the changes to the coastline over time and a reference to submerged landforms and archaeological resources that may be present on the coastline or on the seafloor. And then expanding the state topic in the background to include mention of state regulations pertaining to archaeological resources and to include SHPO in a list of agencies. Go ahead, Scott.
I'm just curious on how many tribes commented on the draft TSP Part 4.
I only had 1 commenter.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then the last comment was to have to include SHPO in the list of agencies invited to the JART. So that would be the only thing outside of the policy section that was brought up. Thoughts on these? Delia?
Sorry. I'm in support of all of these. Just a question on the first 2. Was the commenter able to provide some suggested language to expand those topics? Or would they be?
They pointed me to some directions for suggested language, and I've contacted SHPO to see if they could provide language. So it would be something that's vetted by the tribes or that's vetted by SHPO to make sure that language includes certain points that were brought up, and it's basically these points that are here. But I want to make sure that language is brought to the commenter and to SHPO before I add it in. So I don't have that specific language right here, but I wanted to talk about, I wanted to make sure that this was brought up to the working group, even though I don't have that specific language in front of me yet.
Yeah, that's perfect. I would want it to come from them. So that I'm glad to hear that. And then in terms of process, so the working group wouldn't work on that language. It would come from the tribal interests and then be vetted by SHPO and then go to OPAC.
I don't know whether I think that the input, I would take the language that SHPO provides me and bring it back to the tribal interest to make sure that captures what they want, because they said you should just contact SHPO.
Okay.
They have language in documents already that captures this, and you could maybe just use that, and then I'll bring that back to them and see what they have to say about it, and then that will be brought to OPAC.
Okay, I'm in support of that. Thank you.
Blake?
Yep, just I'm in support of these comments. I like them. I think they're very reasonable, and happy to review the language when it comes back, and kind of excited to see it. So there you go.
Thank you very much, Blake. Laurel?
I was just going to offer my help if you needed any, Marcus, with coordination with SHPO or with our coastal archaeologists might help with figuring out what language they might be talking about.
That would be awesome. That would be excellent, because I've been struggling to find out who should I exactly email to get this language from at SHPO. So thank you very much. Any other thoughts on these points? Jason?
Yeah, just a couple here. The first point here, it says reference to submerged landforms and archaeological resources. Are these identified submerged landforms and archaeological resources, or is this a generic reference?
So this would be a generic reference. There is a really large document that was produced by BOEM and with input from all the coastal tribes that talks about submerged landforms and archaeological resources, but that does not include the territorial sea. It is outside of the territorial sea. And so I don't know that there's been a large scale study to see where the submerged landforms and archaeological resources are within that 3-mile stretch. but there are ones that are farther out than that that have been identified. So I think that the assumption, a good assumption would be that there are within that 3 mile stretch as well.
So that I guess that gets to the reason for my question, is this generic language is essentially opening up what sounds like a requirement to do surveys to identify potentially submerged landforms and archaeological resources, which may be perfectly reasonable. It may be an anticipated and expected part of this process. Is that true?
Well, there's already requirements that are listed in different state regulations and federal regulations to that revolve around archaeological resources. So I don't know that expanding this in the background section is going to create. I don't think that's going to create new ones, but I do think that there are ones that already exist in the regulations.
Well, I think that I think you've articulated my thought on this. Are we creating new requirements here essentially? And then the other one is, does SHPO have any legal nexus to permitting of any type of cable?
I don't think that they have that they create a permit, but if there are archaeological resources, they need to be involved in the process, because there are regulations that govern what you can and can't do. Go ahead, Delia. It seems like you have something to say.
They are a required consultation.
Yeah.
By like federal authorization. I don't know, Blake could speak to the state's relationship there. For ODFW doesn't do that, but they are a required consultation.
So there's nothing peculiar about having SHPO on the JART versus the other agencies that are already designated as part of the JART. Right. Okay, that satisfies my questions.
Go ahead, Laurel. Thank you, Jason.
I was just going to say that technically they're part of Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, a subsection. So it would just be additional representative from our agency.
Thank you, Laurel. Any other thoughts on this? Any objection to having these? All right. I say we move on then. Oh, that break doesn't actually exist anymore because we are totally different schedule. So we'll work on these NOAA comments for the next 26 minutes, and then we will take a break for lunch at 11:30 and come back at 12:30 for public comment, so that we can get kind of back onto schedule, and then we will probably jump back into NOAA comments at around 1 o'clock. So we'll start here. So just to orient everyone with everything that I have going on these next slides, the actual policy that is going to be talked about, or section of the document that's going to be talked about, is generally in the upper left hand corner. Comments will be made normally next. Comments that were made by NOAA are going to be pasted next to that, and generally below I will have either more comments from NOAA that were shared with me via email, or suggested changes. So in the policy section, the highlighted section here, this comment on the right hand side pertains to that section. And that is kind of getting back to the point that I talked about earlier in talking about additional appendices. And this is at the bottom is an edited version of an appendix that would touch this point, and this is from part 5, but it has been edited for part 4. So go ahead and take a look at this. And so the suggestion here is to remove the section that is highlighted and replace it with an appendix that will then have the exact text of the enforceable policies listed out once the text is finalized. Delia?
Yeah, I don't have any objection to this, that it's consistent with what we did for part 5. And you and I have already talked about this some, but can you just explain to the group that that's work that you and the coastal management program will do, and that yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, this is to be consistent with part 5 and part 3 because they both have an appendix with enforceable policies. And this would be something that once the rest of the language is approved, we would then go through and once NOAA's done their review, we would then put the enforceable policies into an appendix so that they're all listed out as enforceable policies. And that would be something that we do at the Coastal Management Program. Yes. Thank you, Delia. Tara?
Yeah, I don't think I'm opposed to removing that language, but wondering, I mean, for context for people in part, who are reading this document to understand that enforceable policies apply to federal actions that affect Oregon's coastal zone. I mean, is there a way to just put in here something along the lines of, once NOAA's OCM approves the enforceable policies as identified in Appendix C, so that it's clear we're only talking about the ones we've pulled out? And does that make sense? I feel like this might be just good context. Maybe it could be in background. Maybe this gets pulled out of the quote unquote policies section, and I just feel like someone reading this who doesn't know what an enforceable policy is or how it applies, that this isn't bad context to have. I think it could be put on the, as an intro to the appendix. I just don't know how many people will go to the appendix if it's not referenced here.
Maybe we could add it as a footnote to the policy section, but it's not. I think that was the problem that that NOAA was having is that it's not just in the policy section; it's also the implementation requirements and other sections that are EPs, and so they didn't think that this was a good place to have this.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm wondering if maybe if the group is amenable, and also just adding somewhere in here, approves the incorporation of the enforceable policies as identified in Appendix C, so it's clear what we're talking about. Maybe just pulling this part out, maybe putting it in the intro section or background section about this. I don't know. I feel like it's just good context for somebody reading Part 4 that might know nothing about this. That's just my thought. So, and maybe we have something to this point and I need to go back and look, but
Thank you, Tara. Natalia?
Yeah, I agree with Tara. If we add a new appendix, so we just need to do some one sentence of reference to that people know that whatever you need to look for, that you can open that Appendix C. I mean, the same as we did for any other references that we added, Appendix A and B, just need to be referenced in the text. Thanks, I agree with that.
So removing this from this section, adding the appendix, and then making sure that it is mentioned somewhere that somewhere outside of the appendix within the main document that mention that the enforceable policies are listed in the appendix, so that people have that reference so that they can look at it if they need to. Am I capturing this?
that's my thought. I could see it being the last sentence of just regular 2 background. It could go, we say the policies and standards within the Territorial Sea Plan can also assist federal agencies in the siting and regulation of infrastructure located in federal waters adjacent to the Territorial Sea. And then this could say, once NOAA's Office for Coastal Management approves the incorporations of the enforceable policies as identified in Appendix C, yada, yada, yada. So I think that could maybe go there, or it could go into potentially, the 2.2 or 2.3 under state or federal law, where we just it's just background. That's all. Maybe. So yeah, I think this could easily be moved, reference an appendix, and that would just be helpful background for education of all.
Excellent. Thank you, Tara. Delia?
Yeah, I was going to suggest adding a sentence to section 2.3, because right now it just says seafloor development within the territorial sea. may require authorizations, permits, certifications, determinations, and easements from DSL, Parks, DEQ, and DLCD. Just add a sentence. I would not keep the future cast tone of that sentence and just say approved enforceable policies or policies approved as enforceable by NOAA's Office of Coastal Management are listed in
Appendix C.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. I made note of that. Thank you very much, Delia. Blake?
That's I was going to make the same suggestion, just a simple sentence for a list of enforceable policies, see Appendix C. So there.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Any opposition to, so I guess what's on the table now is removing this section that's highlighted, adding an Appendix C with the enforceable policies, and then adding a clarifying sentence in the background section, section 2.3, that's similar to this one with tense and things like that changed, referencing Appendix C. Everyone on board with that? I'm not seeing anybody saying they're against that, so that's a good sign. So we will move on to the next section. All right, so I guess for some background here, Jeff and I had some conversations with NOAA in addition to, kind of talking about their comments. So this is coming back to the mitigation policy. They had some issue with adding compensatory mitigation in the mitigation in the policy section, as well as in the mitigation definition. And so in the white text here on the left-hand side was from Jeff, kind of talking to NOAA, and in red is what NOAA had to say about it. So if Jeff would like to elaborate on this, he's welcome to. Otherwise, you guys can read this and let me know your thoughts.
I hope it's self-evident, but yes, I think the intent would be we would only submit numbers 1 through 4 as federal consistency enforceable policies. It does not stop the state from using other enforceable mechanisms to enforce number 5. We just would not be able to use number 5 as a basis for objecting under federal consistency.
Thank you, Jeff. Blake?
So sorry if I'm kind of dense, but so we're having to remove, regardless, we have to remove number 5 from, okay, so we will keep it, but we will just have enforceable policies, and they're going to add qualifying language to make that clear in this section.
No, so NOAA will add qualifying language to the letter that they give us when they approve our list of enforceable policies that we submit. So it would be a separate record. It's easy for me to think about this in terms of that new appendix we're going to create that contains the actual enforceable policies. So in that new appendix, we would only include 1 through 4. But in the main body of Part 4, all 5 would still be present.
Thank you, Jeff. Blake, did you have more?
I did. It's a kind of a follow-up question. So in practice, state agencies would have, this wouldn't be an enforceable policy, but we could have applications for activities that would include compensation as mitigation. With those, how would those activities fare with federal consistency?
I'm not sure what you mean by how would they fare.
Well, I mean, would they be able to attain federal consistency if they were using compensatory mitigation to maintain and protect? So, yeah, I mean, I would think then if we're saying the state will allow compensatory mitigation, but you won't receive federal consistency, I don't see how a project would be able to move forward unless I'm misunderstanding here something. So that's just where I'm trying to get clarity is how would a project that uses compensatory mitigation receive federal consistency?
Mm-hmm. Okay, So if DSL has a separate authority at the state level to require compensatory mitigation, that authority is completely separate from the federal consistency review that we conduct. And so if DSL can require it, that then gets incorporated into the project. And we would not object to a project that had elements of compensatory mitigation in it. So it would not matter that was not one of our enforceable policies. So it's really, enforceable policies are your basis for objection. And if you're not objecting, then it's not relevant. Does that help?
We would also use 1 through 4 as a benchmark of whether or not the other actions that we've identified were taken in the review of the decision, right? So we would want to see that 1 through 4 were acted upon prior to, right? Because this is in kind of a prioritization order. So we could use those items 1 through 4 in our review. We just can't use number 5.
Okay, now,
and
Yeah,
you know, in
Andy-
a nightmare scenario where you only have compensatory mitigation, well, I'm just trying to think of, if you can't avoid it, you can't minimize it, you can't rectify it, you can't reduce it, and the only thing you can do is compensatory mitigation. How does that, affect federal consistency? Because you're not reviewing it for 1 through 4, because the only thing they're able to do is number 5. And I don't know, I mean, I don't do this federal consistency, so my apologies if I'm not kind of understanding where,
I think
what
what we
that review is.
What we would ask for is documentation of why they couldn't meet 1 through 4
well,
as
no,
a part of their application.
yeah, well, I guess it's to the maximum extent practicable, right? That they would need to meet the maximum extent practicable standard of 1 through 4. And if they determine it's not practicable to meet all 4, then that is essentially the off-ramp for federal consistency. And it would be up to the state authorities under DSL to catch that bottom rung of number 5.
Okay,
Does that make
understood.
sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. I appreciate that, Jeff. Thank you.
Yep, and that would be in the scenario where it was a federal applicant. Not a non-federal applicant applying for a federal permit.
Well, the policy itself says to the maximum extent practicable. And so
Okay, sorry. Yeah, you're right. Okay, sorry. Thank you.
Delia?
Andy made my point. He jumped the line. So most of it's already been said, but because it's in order of priority, that's why that's important to us in the policy. And since ODFW is the one who would be coming to whatever nexus we can hang this on, we'd be coming to DSL and saying, this wasn't covered by federal consistency. What are our opportunities to make sure that we address the needs of mitigation through DSL's authorization? Yeah.
I really appreciate that clarification, guys. Thank you.
All right. Does anyone have anything else to say about this section? I mean, I think that as it stands, we can leave it as is, and then just as Jeff pointed out, just having 1 through 4 approved as EPs and not the 5th. How do folks feel about that? I don't know what I just did to my screen. I'm sorry. Oh, geez. There we go. All right. So we will move on to the next. We have about, I think, 9 more minutes, 10 more minutes before we break for lunch. So maybe we can talk about this. So this may need a little bit of Jeff explanation here. But so section 4.3, the resource and use inventory and effects evaluation. NOAA had these comments to say on the right-hand side. And then we got some clarification on necessary data and information is what NDI stands for over here. So if you'd like to read through these, and Jeff can maybe talk about this a little bit better than I can.
Yeah, thank you. A terminology thing. NDI is a specific term of art in federal consistency. And the simplest way I can put it is, what are the pieces of information that we need to have in hand before we begin the review? And so we can hold up the start of our federal consistency review until we have all of the necessary data and information in hand. So we would not start the 6-month clock. However, you can have other information requirements that do not meet the criteria to be this NDI thing, but that you can still require before the end of the process, before you issue your decision of whether the action is consistent or not. And so this was a question of, if we can't require it as a before the starting gun, can we still nevertheless require it by the end, or else they risk getting an objection? And the answer was, yes, you can. And so fundamentally, I think we would still get the information that we need before we have to make a decision.
Thank you, Jeff. Any thoughts on this? I don't know if everyone's had a chance to look these over or look over the comments in the document itself from NOAA, but just wanted to kind of, I don't know that these are huge action items as far as that we need to do anything about it, but this is information that should be brought up to the group. Blake?
I'm just thinking about timelines, and would this, if we're getting this information later, does this affect how long it's going to take for the agencies to make resource decisions?
Well, we were just having a conversation about this morning. The NDI is a complicated little rabbit hole you can go down, where we have Oregon Administrative Rule 660-035-50 sub 2 that says that a completed application is necessary data and information. And so if you have requirements in your applications that include this information, then we can hold off the start of our CZMA review until a completed application is submitted to the state agency. And so there are other ways in which we can make sure that you have the information that you need for your purposes prior to the beginning of our federal consistency review.
Got it. My concern was just that if, we're getting information later or after the fact, it might, be difficult to make resource decisions in a timely manner.
Agreed. And I think that the practical aspect of this is that we can make it clear to applicants that if they want a timely decision from the state, they should be providing this information as soon as possible.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Blake. Any other thoughts on this? Okay, we'll move on. So this kind of talks about a similar issue that was brought up. So the use of available environmental information right here, it's not an EP because it's an agency directive. The suggestion was to replace regulating agencies may allow the applicant to use existing data with applicants may use existing data, or applicants may with regulatory or regulating agency approval use existing data. So thoughts on that? This second one was kind of I came up with after discussions with some other agency folks who had some issue with applicants may use existing data as just being a blanket statement saying that they can. Go ahead, Delia.
Yeah, you covered it, Marcus. I just wanted to support the second option so that there's still a link. I don't want it to be construed as if applicants can use existing data and nothing else is necessary, which I think there's a potential misinterpretation there. I think our intent is that they can use existing data to the extent that that's sufficient, but they may have to do more. So, yeah.
Thank you, Delia. Blake?
I was just thinking that, if NOAA's issue with this is that it is an agency directive. I still feel like, you know, even though I do like the last one, the applicants may with regulatory regulating agency approval, doesn't, it still reads as an agency directive, because in the end, we're saying that they are allowed to. So I think we would still need to amend it, unless I'm, you know, interpreting something wrong there. But I wonder if NOAA might still see that as an agency directive, because we're still providing some sort of approval or direction to the applicant.
Blake, I'll chime in. When they're talking about an agency directive, what I gather is it means, are you telling the agencies what they can and can't do, or are you telling the public what they can and can't do? And so this is saying that the applicants may use the existing data rather than agencies may allow them to use this data. And so it's really just a sentence construction piece.
So Jeff, what are your thoughts on the second option in the bottom? I think it's still directing the applicants, but Blake brought up a point that it may be construed as directing the agencies. How do you feel about that second one?
Honestly, I think maybe there was just a misunderstanding on what agency directive. So what Jeff was, I think what it makes sense now, what Jeff was saying is that it's about whether the agency is doing something or whether the applicant is doing something. So I think with regulating agency approval would, you know, I was interpreting that as, you know, the agency is directing the applicant, but I see what Jeff is saying. So
the one potential issue you might run into with this is, what would be the criteria by which a regulating agency would approve or not approve the use of existing data? That whenever you leave something to be potentially arbitrary, that may lead to problems. And not having run this by NOAA, I can't say for sure.
Thank you,
I don't know,
Jeff.
Steve, if you have a perspective on this sort of deal.
I have a different question.
Okay. Then,
Same. My question is, do we need this to be an enforceable policy? Because we could just leave it as is. It's really just there. My recollection is that there was a request to have this in here so that it's clear that an applicant doesn't have to start over at scratch and spend millions of dollars on new surveys if that information is already available. So this is the state saying, if you have enough existing information, just use that. Like if you're doing a NEPA review for the feds or something. So we could just leave it as is and just not have it as an enforceable policy. But am I missing something, Jeff, as far as like why it would benefit us to have it as an enforceable policy?
I'm thinking about the policy that precedes it, 4.3.2, sufficiency of resource and use inventory and effects evaluation. And it says the applicant must provide during pre-application information and data to complete this evaluation that is sufficient to identify and quantify the short-term and long-term effects of the proposed project. I think that we could just lean on that policy and then use during our review and our interpretation to say the applicant provided some already existing environmental information that met this sufficiency standard, so we are using it as part of our review. I think you make a good point that we don't necessarily need to put this forward as an enforceable policy.
So before we break for lunch, which should be happening right now, let's just take a quick vote on whether we should we just leave this as it is and lean on the previous policy as Jeff mentioned to make sure that the information is sufficient and not have this be an enforceable policy. I think that that's the simplest answer here without having to have any changes. Anyone object to that? Okay, not seeing any hands raised. So we will take a break for lunch and we will reconvene at 12:30 and with public comment, and then we will jump back into NOAA comments at 1 o'clock.
Hey, Marcus.
Yes.
I just wanted to quickly go to a comment in the chat from earlier about the, I think, map appendix for the cable routes. Since I'm not going to be able to participate the rest of the day, I just wanted to make sure that I understood the outcome of that conversation. I think the gist of it was that, the research cables were not shown. The cables for the Ocean Observatories Initiative are included, but I think the cable lease easements and the conduits for the PACWave system have been laid, and I don't think those are going to change. So I was curious to know the group's thoughts and comments on that appendix as a whole.
Andy, I have a bunch of notes for that
notes
from that conversation that I can talk to you about, just
Okay.
separate from this meeting, and we can kind of talk about conforming to what the group kind of talked about there. But I see your point.
Okay.
All right. So yeah. So we'll talk about it at another time, just because for time's sake right now. So we will reconvene at 12:30 for public comment. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. When you get back, just turn on your camera or react or let us know in the chat, and we'll get started in just 1 minute. All right, we're going to get started now. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We are going to continue on with public comment. So if there are any members of the public who would like to comment at this time, now is the time. Please raise your hand so that I can call on you. Stan Dynak.
Yeah, hi Marcus. Hi everyone. Stan Dynak here. I apologize. I could not stay for the entire day here with my schedule. Usually do. I support the NCP cable system with Microsoft. And I just had a couple of things. First off, I want to say thank you again to everybody for all you do and all the hard work and effort you put into this. There's just a couple of quick things from my end with the latest draft on section 4.7 under the decom and recovery. The only thing I would say is to maybe reconsider the points for requiring a encroachment application, easement application from the DSL. I guess I haven't really sat here and discussed it in length, but the cable's already there, so I'm just not really sure why that would be necessary. I could see some backup requirements to it, but the application itself I'm struggling with a little bit. And the other point is on section 6 for the territorial sea plan review itself being for 7 years. It's another thing that stood out where right now, the way the language reads, it can take a review at any time. So I'm not sure, 7 years just sounds like a very short period of time, especially given how long this has taken. I believe we're looking at somewhere around 2 years already. So I guess we could all go full time working on territorial sea plans if we keep that. So just thinking maybe extend it or leave it possibly as the option, to have a review as necessary, and maybe 10, 20 years or something like that, if that's not acceptable. just 7 years is going to come quick. But anyway, that's all I had for now. Thank you again for all you do. And sorry I couldn't stay for the whole session.
Thank you, Stan. Is there any other public comment? Any other members of the public who would like to speak right now? I am not seeing any other hands. We can give it another minute or so to see if anybody else raises their hand. Otherwise, we'll move on shortly back to NOAA comments. I'm going to stop my share now so that I can get back to where we were in the oh, I already
Steve has
fixed
a
it.
hand, yeah, rising. Steve has a hand rising.
Okay, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I just wanted to, Stan made a good point there, but I wanted to just clarify one thing. The Oregon Administrative Procedures Act requires that new rules are reviewed after 5 years after adoption. But because there's already a Territorial Sea Plan Part 4, this is an amendment. So I don't think we have to do it in 5 years. 7 is okay. You could consider a longer time period, but I just wanted to clarify that we're not under the APA requirement to review this in 5 years because it's an amendment to an existing rule.
Thank you, Steve. Were there any other comments? I don't see any other hands raised, so we can move on. Okay, we will move on. So this is another comment from NOAA. This is about 4.3.4, the inventory content, and it has to do with that necessary data and information. I think that this is just a case where we need to change the wording here a little bit so as not to confuse applicants with something that has a definition from NOAA. I don't know if Jeff's back with us, but he can maybe talk on this if there's more to say about it. Otherwise, the suggestion is to, they've provided us a suggestion, but I'm open to hearing other suggestions as well. Blake?
I was just going to recommend, making it easy and removing necessary. So shall provide data and information. But I think that what NOAA is suggesting, the applicant shall provide the information and data described below sufficient to determine, etc. I think that's also equally well. So I'm happy to, go with consensus here, but I think we could either remove necessary or go with what NOAA has to say.
Thank you, Blake. Any other thoughts on this?
I agree.
Okay. So I guess what's on the table now is that we just either remove necessary or use NOAA's suggested terminology. Is there anybody opposed to that? Otherwise, I think it's just kind of scriveners at this point to just change the wording a bit. Okay, we will move on then. Oh, Natalia.
Yeah, it's not a comment. Well, it's a comment regarding inventory content, but not this particular content. I think it's just formatting, since we have in the table of content under this 4.34 inventory content, and then we constantly repeated this under 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is it was just copy paste stuff, or why do we need to repeat constantly inventory content in the table of content?
Oh, that might have been just a mess up, and I'd have to look
Okay.
at it as to what happened. I
Yeah,
had
that I was thinking probably formatting stuff. Yeah.
I had renamed each of those sections after what it's supposed to be covering, so that might not have happened on the next go through. But I can fix that. Okay, we'll move on to the next. All right, so this just has to do with the written evaluation. I don't know if Jeff's with us. He may be at a different meeting, but so there would be this potential approval letter that would clarify the applicability to for federal agencies versus other applicants. And so with agencies in particular, you can't dictate how they provide you the information, which some of these sections start to do. These are comments from NOAA. So when we're asked to approve information requirements such as this, we will likely add qualifying language to that point. This is just something I wanted to bring up. I don't think that we need to change anything specifically here, but I wanted to bring this to everyone's attention that would probably be in their approval letter. Any thoughts on that? All right, not seeing anything. Great, moving right along. So over to routing and landing. So we've so this is a point that was brought up that there's issue that NOAA has kind of taken with this first sentence that states, did the state intend to create such a strict standard? Avoid conflicts with other uses is a tough standard. Fully avoid and all uses needs defining or clarification, or to avoid to the extent practicable. Tara, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that I see all of those things listed, and I see that the first thing in the list says preserve access to ocean fisheries to the extent practicable, and wondering if we could move that to the extent practicable to the end of the list. And so it would be do all those things to the extent practicable.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the suggestion that I have down here on the bottom right, which is to remove to the extent practicable after ocean fisheries and insert it at the end of the sentence after ocean shore.
I now see that is your suggestion. And maybe to that point, minimize adverse effects on other natural resources. I'm wondering if should that be a mitigate instead of minimize, like mitigate adverse, because we have our whole mitigation hierarchy, which includes minimization. Just wondering people's thoughts on that.
Let me see. I'm trying to catch up where you're talking about here. I see.
So after the part that's highlighted, we say and minimize adverse effects on other natural resources. And I'm wondering if it should say and mitigate adverse effects on other natural resources of the seafloor or ocean shore to the extent practicable, because our mitigation hierarchy includes minimizing, but first it includes avoiding and et cetera, like minimizing feels like the lower one here, where I think we really need mitigate starting with avoid, then down the list. I see Delia's got her hand up too.
Yeah, great point, Tara. I think this section and this sentence in particular is about citing and how the state wants to look at things when the locations of a development are not yet certain. So mitigation is what you do if you can't avoid or minimize through appropriate locations. So I think we want to keep mitigation out of that, because this is about responsible siting, and then keep the mitigation discussion for other sections. Is that okay from your perspective? Tara, do you have any response to that?
Oh, sorry. Can you repeat? So keeping the mitigation part separate?
Yeah, I think we want to keep it separate because this is about responsible siting and the locations of. And then Elaine, I see your hand too, but I was wondering if Tara had any response to that.
I mean, I don't have a problem including mitigation in the siting process. So I guess I'm unclear. I think Elaine has suggested that this sort of be at the end. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I sorry, I missed this discussion around the NOAA comments earlier on mitigation and the compensatory mitigation. So not exactly sure how that fits in, but I guess I see it as a hierarchy for routing and landing. I see avoidance, minimization, and mitigation as a hierarchy for siting as well as other reviews. So I guess I would see all three going in here. So
okay,
yeah.
So sorry, go ahead, Elaine.
No, that's just my question. Is it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just share a little bit more about my perspective there, and then we can certainly entertain any alternatives. But when I'm looking at a proposed project, I'm looking to do those sequential actions. So I really want to use siting as the best opportunity to avoid impacts first,
right,
and then maybe modify the project so that we can minimize those effects. Right. And so mitigation is kind of, we don't have a lot of options for any of the other parts of the mitigation hierarchy. These are parts of the mitigation hierarchy, but we don't have a lot of options once we get past avoidance and minimization. And so to me, it's important that we stress that the state's perspective is that when we are locating infrastructure, we're seeking to avoid and minimize first and foremost, because that's really the best opportunity to achieve those.
Mm-hmm.
So if you add mitigate to this sentence, then it's like, okay, so we're just gonna lean into mitigation, but we don't have as many options. So we really want to stress avoidance and minimization here.
I get that, and I get the emphasis on those steps for the hierarchy. Where did we land then on using compensatory mitigation, including compensatory mitigation as a form of acceptable mitigation?
It's going to stay in, I believe. Are we done with that conversation? Maybe we're not done with that conversation, but I believe it's going to stay in. It just won't be an enforceable policy.
Okay. So where do you see then mitigation coming in with respect to siting? Because like if you avoid, minimize, and then to the extent that there are, still unacceptable adverse impacts, you can mitigate. Otherwise, you really are limited to only siting where you can avoid and minimize. You know what I mean? Like it really is restrictive.
I don't. Say more.
I mean, you're limiting like the third prong of the hierarchy if we don't have mitigate in here when it comes to to permissible siting locations. So it's like if your proposed route can't satisfy, the avoid and minimize, then it's a no-go because mitigation isn't an option. Maybe I'm not understanding this correctly, but like that's where it's like I see, unless we're thinking of using mitigation as a way to minimize.
I mean, I think we have to take this section in the context of the whole amendment.
Mm-hmm.
And I that's not my read of it. My read is that during routing and landing, the locations need to first avoid and then minimize. The locations, though, wouldn't mitigate. The locations we would go into mitigation once we've determined if there's anything that can't be avoided or minimized.
As the next step.
Yeah, and that would be,
And-
that's handled by the amendments. It's just not in this section.
And where is it? Where do we deal with that?
Well, primarily in section 3, where the maintain and protect requires an order of priority, avoid, minimize, rectify, reduce, compensate. But then the definition of mitigation also includes all of those steps. And so the full hierarchy is referenced multiple times in the document, every time it says mitigation. I think that's where we've landed.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard when we're looking at it like, you know, word by word and then in the context of it. 'Cause
Yeah.
It's, okay. We can
I
keep
think
moving
I
on,
think
like, right now.
in my perspective, and then I'll stop after this so others can talk, but in my perspective, if we change the where we have avoid and minimize and kind of reintroduce the whole hierarchy, then it de-stresses, in my perspective, it de-stresses what we're trying to achieve with responsible siting, which is really
Yeah.
avoidance and minimization.
Yeah.
That's my perspective, but I'll stop now, and Natalia and somebody else had their hand up too.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah, maybe Blake has some other idea, but yes, even choosing the location, if we not saying yes, first avoid, minimize, but there is also a possibility to mitigate, to reduce impact. So if we basically misses here, we are cutting compensation fee that DSL can charge if it's environmental damaging, even including during, routing and landing the cable. I don't know, maybe it should be some rephrasing, minimize and future mitigate adverse effects. So highlight that, yes, first we minimize, but because as we talk about the mitigation fee, it's up to authority, it's up to DSL, but then we will do some changes, the rulemaking for that. But it should be somehow here that it should give some space for mitigation fee, compensation fee. It's not just minimization, even during the initial choosing the location for cable landing, because there is a possibility, okay, new location, we minimize if it's new cable, if it's new area, but then over time, that area could be, let's say, I don't know, like smart cables, sensor could be attached to the existing cables. So that already not a new location, then it should be mitigation or crossing cables like in the same area, additional specific distance standards between telecommunication, let's say, and power cables. We cannot actually minimize already, then we need to follow mitigation. So I'm confusing really if we can, I don't know, reframe something or add that allows space for mitigation fee. At least we mentioned somehow there. Maybe Blake has some other thoughts. Thanks.
Always happy to add my opinion to the list. No, I mean, I just feel like, honestly, I'm a little, I don't want to say confused, but I just feel like there's like a snake eating its own tail here, where we're talking about avoidance and minimization and whether we should add mitigation, but mitigation includes avoidance and minimization, and also includes reducing and rectifying, and could include compensatory mitigation. So I just honestly don't know if that is the place here. And to kind of pull us back on track, I don't think that is the point of NOAA's comments. I think their point was we are creating kind of a high standard here that might not be the way we've phrased it, because I think the intent was that we would the phrase "the extent practicable" would be applicable to each of these phrases. Ocean fisheries, preserve access to ocean fisheries, avoid conflicts with other uses, and protect marine habitats, etc. So I think we should stick to that point and either add the avoid, to the extent possible at the beginning of the sentence or the end. My personal preference is to add it at the beginning. I don't know why, but I just feel like it reads better that way than at the end, but it's not a hill worth dying on, so.
Any other thoughts on this? Okay, so what's on the table right now, the first action, I guess, is do we remove "to the extent practicable" where it is and relocate it to the end of the sentence? And we can talk about adding mitigate as a separate question after doing that. Blake?
If we added mitigate, would we need to get OPAC's approval for that change in language, or is that be considered like not substantive, change? I'm just curious.
Well, they're going to have to review all of these things. I mean, it may be something that we bring up. Go ahead, Tara.
Oh, I was just probably going to say what you were about to say, that I think we could highlight that we made that change in the meeting, but I don't anticipate that if we explained it, that mitigate includes minimization, but it also includes avoiding, et cetera. So down the line, I don't know that there would be a problem, but we could just highlight that that's a change that's been made. If the working group agrees to that. I'm sorry I brought this up because I'm the one who did this, but I was just reading minimize and realizing after our whole discussion around mitigation that's minimizing is a part of mitigation. So that, yeah, I'm fine if we don't change it, frankly. And if we just want to put "to the extent practicable" at the end of the sentence and that cures NOAA's concern, I'm okay moving ahead in that way as well. But can get a sense of the working group here.
That would be my preference as well.
So that's what's on the table right now. Any opposition to removing "to the extent practicable" from where it is and adding it to the end of the sentence to modify the entire sentence?
I think as long as it's clear that it modifies the entire sentence, because each the phrases are, preserve, avoid, protect. So as long as it's clear that it goes to that and then comment and minimize, I still am not sure where we landed on minimize versus mitigate, but I'm okay moving this forward. I think as long as it's clear that "to the extent practicable" modifies each of those such that it's not absolute, right?
I hear you. Tara, then Jason, then Blake.
We should kick it to Steve because he's not here, so he can draft it.
I had the same thought about, Elaine typed it all out in the chat because that is our intent. So to cure that as opposed to putting it at the end, so it seems like it only applies to the one at the end, I would say we change it actually to put it between "shall" and "preserve." So you'd say locations for new infrastructure within the state territorial sea shall, to the extent practicable, preserve, avoid, minimize. Does that make sense? And that, I guess there would be commas between there, maybe somebody with better editorial grammar can correct me on that, but does that make better sense so that it precedes the three things that we'll do to the extent practicable, as opposed to only modifying potentially the last one, which is not our intent?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you, Tara. Did that rectify what everybody else had their hands raised for, or because all those hands
pretty
disappeared?
much. I was just going to say that's why I felt like it read easier by putting it in the beginning, because it seems clearer that it applies to each of those phrases.
Yes, agreed.
So the change would be to change the location of extent practicable to between shall and preserve with a couple of commas. And so to keep it grammatically correct. Any opposition to that? Okay, excellent. We will move on to the next point. Okay, so this has to do with cable burial. So the 4.5.1, the first section is okay as an enforceable policy. They did have some comments about the subsections of 4.5.1, point 1 and point 2. And so for federal consistency, the OCMP cannot base a decision on what another entity or agency did or didn't decide. So the section states what DSL can base its findings on. That's fine for state review and decision, but there's nothing enforceable there that the OCMP could use for a federal consistency decision. So as it stands right now, 4.5.1 would be enforceable, but what the other part would just be a non-enforceable policy when it comes to federal consistency, but could still be a requirement for state. And then for the burial application, this is what Jeff had to say. I don't know if Jeff's here with us right now. I haven't seen him. But while the post-burial verification in section 4.5.1.2 involves an activity taking place after CZMA concurrence, couldn't we still have this be an enforceable policy upon which we base a condition? This would be a way to obtain affirmative agreement with an applicant that they will provide this verification after the CZMA decision, or else result in an objection, but we recognize that there would not be an enforcement mechanism. And NOAA said this is likely fine. So I just wanted to bring these things up. I don't know that we need to change anything here. I don't, the section 4.5.1.1, there's nothing that we can really do to that sentence or to that policy in order to make it federally consistent, but 4.5.1 still would be. I don't know if that was clear to everybody. Sorry if I butchered that in some way, but I did want to bring that up and see if the group had anything to say about that. Oh, Jeff is here. Hi, Jeff.
Hi. Sorry, I was in another meeting that just ended.
Did you catch what I had said about this?
Yeah, and
okay.
I think that we pre-visaged that this would happen, which is why we created those two sub-policies so that we wouldn't lose 4.5.1 if there was something that NOAA could not support in the other ones.
Yeah. Questions, comments, thoughts from anyone else? Not seeing anything in chat or any hands raised, so we can move on. So to the maintenance section, so there was some discussion about this, and Jeff can maybe talk to this a little bit more, but the maintenance section is post work, so it's not really covered by federal consistency. NOAA did say if it was written to require a maintenance plan similar to what is in Chapter 5, that it may be approvable as an enforceable policy. I guess that was something I wanted to run by the group to see if we wanted to insert language here that requires a maintenance plan, although I don't know that we would need to get into the weeds as to what that would look like, or we could say, what that has to be what DSL would want from a maintenance plan. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I was involved on board the ship when they installed the cable. Mr. Dynack is responsible for the Cross Pacific. And in the process of installing that cable, they had to take a section of a cable that was it had been buried in the 90s, the 1990s. And I've got a piece of it in my office, and it is absolutely looks like the day it was put in. It looks brand new. You know, when it came out of the mud, it was buried. And so I don't think it makes sense to require a maintenance plan, unless the maintenance plan simply said, if there's something goes wrong, the company will look into will repair it. But having periodic inspections is actually what got us here in the first place, is we wanted to remove periodic inspections because they were very expensive and provided nothing substantive. We had, you know, we had originally had that as part of our agreement with cable companies when we first formed the organization. And after doing it for quite a few years and had 10 surveys of cables, we found no case, not a single case where a cable that was buried became unburied. And so as other states have done, such as California, they have reduced eliminated periodic inspections of cables. So we don't want to see that would just be an extra burden that is a waste of fuel and has more environmental impact with the fuel burn than any benefit of confirming that something that's buried is still buried.
Thank you, Scott. And I guess to be clear, I don't think that the suggestion was to bring back periodic inspection. But Delia and then Blake.
Yeah, I think in order to, so we worked on this language, you know, and came to something that we're all comfortable with, I think. And my suggestion would be that in order to make it an enforceable policy, that we comply with what NOAA is suggesting, which is that DSL would require a plan about the cables, which can happen pre-construction, right? The plan would be pre-construction as opposed to some post-construction activity. That's all I think that they're just saying federal consistency ends once the consistency determination is in. And so if you want this to be an enforceable policy, then it has to require something that happens before that determination is issued. So we could just say, you know, as opposed to requiring the inspections that we've all agreed to, it requires a plan documenting all the inspections that we've all agreed to. That's all. And I think in that way we could achieve both. We could keep all the language that's in here right now, not adding any inspections to it, and just say DSL shall require, and then insert right there an installation and maintenance plan specifying that cables, pipelines, utilities, or fixtures shall be inspected, blah, blah, blah. Same as we've agreed to, just changing it from what it reads right now to a plan requiring that.
Thank you, Delia. And I guess the other option here, which would also be acceptable, and it's up to the group, is to leave it as it is, and it's then not an enforceable policy, and it's something that happens after. Blake?
You know, I was just going to say, I believe that we, you know, kept all this language as it is because we wanted it to be broad enough to cover all types of, you know, crossings, so cables, pipelines, and utilities. And you know, I don't want us to get so focused on, you know, we totally understand at DSL that the inspections for cables don't make you know, near as much sense after installation just because of the nature of the cables, but for a pipeline or other utility it might be really relevant for us to be able to require that. I don't see the importance of having this as an enforceable policy, so my preference would be to just keep it as it is. We, you know, require an operation plan for these cables, if I'm not mistaken. Sorry, I don't have my applications in front of me. which would likely address these type of things. So I don't know if there's additional language necessary, but I'll quit talking for now.
Thank you, Blake. Jeff?
Thanks. I guess the question for DSL, do you have existing authority to require an inspection that you deem necessary? And I'm seeing you nod your head.
We do.
If that's,
When we issue the easement right now, we can require an annual inspection or an inspection at any, frequency that might not be, agreeable to the applicant, but if it is necessary for us to make that decision to have that, part of the terms and conditions, then we would. So, current authority allows us to do that. Current authority allows us to ask for additional information during the application process. So if we want to require maintenance plan, we don't need, language in the Territorial C plan to give us that authority. We can do that currently.
yeah, my instinct on could we make a plan the requirement itself, despite what NOAA has said there, traditionally they don't tend to approve procedural requirements. They're looking for a specific criteria. And there are some criteria here, inspect it as part of installation and after a major geologic event, but the as otherwise required by a regulatory agency is kind of an incorporation by reference of some other requirement that we're not specifically referring to here. It's a little bit wishy-washy. My recommendation would be that if the authorities already exist as part of the post-construction phase, that I'm not sure what we gain by putting a hook in the federal consistency decision prior to a project being approved. But if others see value there, please speak up.
Any other thoughts on this? So I guess the decision that's before us right now is to either leave it as is or to change this to be able to work through federal consistency by, we would need to add DSL shall require a installation and maintenance plan and then basically everything would be the same in here. But if I understand correctly, Jeff, are you stating that there would probably be an issue with the incorporation by reference through the shall occur as otherwise required by a regulatory agency if we do try and make this an enforceable policy?
This one is hard to parse because I don't know what other agencies besides DSL might require and what their basis for requiring would be. And so it's hard to say for sure. What would be the criteria by which additional inspection would, it's frankly just not clear to me.
I would have to agree, Jeff. I'm not sure who the other regulatory agencies, perhaps we had that in there to cover the possibility that there is another regulatory agency that would be able to require inspection as part of the issuing of their permit. So short of that, I don't know.
So I guess what I'm hearing, and it's not that everybody's spoken yet, so I don't know that this is consensus, but do we just leave this as it is and have it not be an enforceable policy? Are there folks opposed to that who feel very strongly that they want this to be an enforceable policy? I guess that's the question that I'm asking right now. Because if folks do not feel strongly, then I think that we should leave it as is. All right, Scott?
Yeah, I just concur. I don't think there's a big value in having that be an enforceable policy. So I'm very happy to just leave it as it is.
All right. Okay, that seems to be what I'm seeing from most folks. Yeah, and I agree with what you said, Becky. The original inclusion was from DEQ that may require an inspection of a pipeline or fixture. So, but anyway, we'll move on to the next. So this comes back to the communication and cooperation or cooperative mechanisms. It repeats some of what is in what we just talked about in burial section 4.5.1.1 and is presumably not an enforceable policy. This is just kind of a comment from NOAA that OCMP will make its determination based on all information submitted and can't require agreements between applicant and users. Since this is just a may consider for the state decision process, I don't see how it plays into federal consistency decisions. I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. I don't think that we need to change anything, but just, kind of making note that this is not an enforceable policy because it's a agency directive. Any thoughts or any comments on this before we move to the next? Okay, well, what time is it? Oh, Delia?
I just wanted to reiterate that we definitely support the need for written documentation of agreements to happen. It doesn't have to be an enforceable policy, but I just want to reiterate for the group that is an important thing moving forward.
Absolutely. And I guess I'd like to make clear, and maybe Jeff might want to chime in to say, make this more clear, but just because it's not an enforceable policy doesn't mean that the state can't require it. It just means that it can't hold up federal consistency determinations. Is that correct,
right,
Jeff?
That is correct.
Okay.
Right.
Great. I don't think we need to take a break right now. So let's move to the, oh gosh, we made it through everything. So because we did DOJ in the morning, so I was thinking that we had all these things. So we could just talk about next steps, and then maybe I'll do another call for public comment here after we go through these next steps, just to make sure that nobody joined later after that, and maybe we'll end early today, everyone. Wild. So next steps, there are other steps outside of the amendment process. So the amendment process, we have this OPAC meeting on September 8th. I will make any changes that we talked about and agreed upon today to the document, and then I will get that out to everybody, including back to DOJ, back to NOAA, out to everybody, so that we can kind of look at it. But that will be going to OPAC on September 8th. After I'm done with that, I will be working on a landing page on OregonOcean.info, and we will have a map viewer for GIS layers that were produced and compiled by Dogami. By the way, I know that I sent that out in the meeting materials, just making sure that everybody is aware that Dogami's report is out there. It's published. It is on OregonOcean.info, as well as wherever they have it published, which is in that link that I sent out. And then I will be working on the permitting process guide to put on this landing page. Natalia, did you have something?
Yeah, Marcus, regarding the Dogami report, maybe it was just my problem, but it's not possible to open that link. Like, I was not able to see any report. Maybe it's like technical link broken or something like that.
Yeah, same.
Oh, the same. Okay, just not.
Yeah.
Just,
Okay. Well, I will try and resend that link out to everybody then, or a different link. I'll try and fix the link and make sure that I get it sent out correctly.
Marcus,
I
also
apologize.
permitting process guide. What do you mean by this? You will just combine all agency permitting process, or how it should look like?
So this is, so we talked about this, I think, during the last working group meeting. It'll be where that flow chart lives, as well as it'll give more timeline stuff. I'll be using a lot of the information that you provided, Natalia, from DSL, the presentations that you provided, as well as information that I kind of gleaned from all the different agencies. That will all be put into one process guide that kind of shows, like, this is the pre-application, this is how it's going to flow, and these are some general timelines as to how long it could take. Because that's kind of what was voted on during the last working group meeting, that the policy document of the TSP Part 4 is not really the right place for those kind of information, or that kind of data needs to live. So it'll be in this guide that will be on the website. So that's what I'll be working on between now and the OPAC meeting mainly.
Great. So when can we expect this guide? Do you know approximately?
I promise it'll be there before the end of September.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Can this group have an opportunity to review a draft of it before you publish it?
I don't know. I'll have to check in
Okay.
with my superiors on that, but
Not that we need to reconvene, but
potentially.
just an opportunity to provide any comments.
Yeah, I can probably send that out to everybody. It's just it just kind of depends on timing and stuff. It's really just compiling data that's already been sent out. So, were there any other next steps that I missed that anyone thinks needs to be brought up, or any other points that I missed today that you gleaned from reading the DOJ comments or the NOAA comments that I didn't bring up today? I think that I got everything, but you know, I'm my own biggest fan here. Okay,
If I could
great.
just follow up, what was the report that Natalia was having trouble accessing? Was it ours? I missed that.
Yes, I don't know whether was it the link that I sent that it was just not showing up as a page at all. Okay.
Yeah, it was an initial email for invitation for the 10th working group, and there was like registration link and also final Dagami report. And when you click, it's just not possible to open.
Okay, I just pasted the link to the report, the front page of that. So you should be able to download everything from there. But if you have any questions, just shoot me an email. Thanks.
Yeah, now it works. Thank you so much, Reed.
Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, if it was today, our website just transferred domain names, so it may have caused an issue, but
oh, that one. Yeah, could be. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that, Reed. Also, Laurel, to your comment, yes, for sure. I'm going to make sure I'll be vetting each of the processes with each agency for sure. So yes. Any other questions or comments? All right. I think we're done. My goodness.
Wow.
I think we're surprisingly done surprisingly early. Yeah, thank you everyone for all of this. I know that it's been kind of a long, wild ride, and I really appreciate everyone showing up to these meetings, and I really appreciate everyone showing up to, I guess this is our third extra meeting that we hadn't had planned. So I really appreciate the flexibility and people being able to come here and work through these things. And I think that we have some nice policy that's coming out of this. So I appreciate that. So
Thanks, Marcus.
thanks everybody. And I'll give you multiple hours of your day back.
Yeah, thank you
Awesome.
everyone for the swift work today. Appreciate it. We'll see you all soon.
Thanks. See ya.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
thanks. Bye.